We as a community are pretty starved for Zelda news, and so naturally we've clung on to the few nuggets of Breath of the Wild 2 news we've gotten and analyzed the hell out of them. And possibly no piece of news has been more thoroughly analyzed than the now famous quote by Aonuma.
The new Breath of the Wild, or the sequel to it, is not necessarily going to be related to Majora's Mask or inspired by it. What we showed you currently is a little darker.
Naturally, as news dramatizes in the way that it's prone to, people extract dark to mean scary, and you get endless speculation that Breath of the Wild 2 will be a horror game. While I still think that it's a very real possibility that as a community we've read far too much into that quote, it got me thinking, how could Breath of the Wild 2 go about being scary? Certainly, the Zelda series is no stranger to dark themes. They can be found in the majority of the games. But again, terror and darkness are not the same thing. Breath of the Wild itself was dark, but it wasn't scary. Thrilling, ominous, but never terrifying. So if we do want Breath of the Wild 2 to be genuinely scary, as many people do seem to want, how can it pull this off? Well, I'd like to try and answer that. First, I'd like to consider what makes something scary, and then I'd like to look at examples of genuine fear in prior Zelda games. Then finish the video off with some ideas on how the sequel to Breath of the Wild could implement these ideas to offer some genuine frights of its own. So what makes something scary? And not jump scare scary, I mean what makes something dreadful. What makes something terrifying? Well, I think there are two sorts of factors: powerlessness and a lack of agency. Certainly other aspects can exist. Body horror and grotesque imagery certainly can help, and sometimes be spooky in their own right, but they can rarely cause true fear on their own. The demonic legions of doom look grotesque, but I never felt scared of them, and that's because I never felt powerless or like my agency was being affected. Quite the opposite in Doom, actually. Terror and fear are caused through a sense of powerlessness and a reduction of agency. A great example can be found in the Alien series. The alien itself is a pretty spooky fella, but the alien itself isn't enough to cause fear. And we know that because when we're mowing them down with machine guns or watching a predator cut them down in swaths, we don't feel any sort of fear. Adrenaline, excitement maybe, but not fear. Take away the predator though? The machine gun? Put players in the shoes of a single woefully unprepared soldier being tracked by the alien through the ship? Well, then you have one of the best horror games of that year. They made the protagonist powerless by taking away her powerful weaponry, and they reduced her agency by making her unable to roam the ship without worry, and the result is fear. These examples can be found throughout Zelda as well. My favorite example is the Dead Hand, probably rivaling the ReDead when it comes to the most well-known scary moment in Zelda. But I want you to stop for a second and think about something. When you recall your scary encounter with the Dead Hand, which encounter was it? Was it when you fought him as the child in the bottom of the well, or as an adult in the Shadow Temple? Be honest, did you even remember that the Dead Hand was in the Shadow Temple? The Dead Hand is gross looking and unnerving to look at undoubtedly, but that doesn't change in the Shadow Temple, yet you probably lost your fear of him by then. The Dead Hand in the bottom of the well is undoubtedly the one you think of when you consider your Dead Hand experience, and the reason for this is because of that powerlessness. When you face off against the Dead Hand as a child, it feels wrong and cruel, and it's sort of sickening to think of a small boy facing off against something so ungodly, with only a puny sword and the toys of a child to protect himself. When the Dead Hand picks young Link up and takes a bite of him, you think back to every spooky folklore you've ever heard about naughty kids losing their life to monsters in the dark. As young Link, you're seemingly powerless against such a horrifying evil. This isn't the case as adult Link. You're the hero of time, you're wielding the Master Sword. The Dead Hand no longer towers over you, in fact it's basically your height. It's an equal opponent, maybe something less. Slap on the lens of truth to locate its body and effortlessly dispatch of it. That wasn't scary, that was easy peasy. But there's no denying that the first encounter was scary. That's the relationship between powerlessness and terror. Even in relation to the other memorably scary Zelda moment, encountering the ReDead, this relationship to powerlessness and the reduction of agency can be found. It works as a child for identical reasons to the Dead Hand. You have to run past a group of spooky enemies you can barely hurt, and their piercing shriek is accompanied by the robbery of your agency as they creep closer and closer. Then, after you get the Sun Song and a wider arsenal of weaponry, the ReDead stop being so scary. The exception being after waking up as adult Link, confused and freshly faced with your failures and the ruination of everything you know. The story and Link's position are at an all-time low, which is why the ReDead that litter about ruined Castletown spook us so much. They don't offer powerlessness through gameplay, but through narrative. At first, we believe these ReDead are the citizens of Castletown before finding them safe at Kakariko. And as we struggle to accept the ruin that Ganondorf brought down, we feel powerless. All we can do is run past the ReDead, each track-stopping screech delaying the sense of relief that comes with escaping to the green sunny fields of Hyrule. So, how can Breath of the Wild 2 be genuinely scary? Through powerlessness and the reduction of player agency. I certainly don't mean to remove player agency, as that isn't fun or scary, it's just frustrating. I mean the clever reduction of it. Player agency is player freedom, and the ReDead in Castletown don't remove your agency. They don't prevent you from exiting Castletown, they only reduce it. They hinder your agency, not remove. You know what's going to happen when you run past them. It isn't a surprise, and you're not looking forward to it. This is the dread that can be caused by reducing agency through clever use of spooky obstacles. And Breath of the Wild 2 has ample opportunity for this. Imagine Hyrule Castle in the first game with its narrow hallways and caves. It's a fun place to explore, but it isn't really scary. Now imagine if, as you entered it, the entire place began slowly filling up with malice, almost like it was flooding. The deeper you go, the harder it is to escape the malice, and eventually you're crawling up walls and onto rooftops to avoid it. But it doesn't stop, it just keeps growing, and eventually tentacles of malice begin forming and following you wherever you go. This continues and worsens until you're either caught in the malice and die, or leave the castle grounds. Now imagine this happening every time you entered the castle grounds. The initial spook of it happening might be a bit frightening for sure, but much like knowing what the ReDead will do when you run past them in Castletown, the dread comes from knowing what awaits you every trip to Hyrule Castle you make. It looks like Hyrule Castle is going bye-bye for the sequel, but this philosophy could be applied to all sorts of other areas. The idea of an underground cavern system is popular. What if the caverns are full of strong monsters that will actively hunt for you? The actual act of fighting the monsters might be exhilarating and fun, but the thought of being hunted when you enter the caverns will cause the same sort of dread as the ReDeads every time you think of it. Or how about as you get further along in the game, Ganondorf's malice begins hunting you regardless of where you are. At random, very well spread out intervals, as you're wandering around, an audio cue will play and sinister music will begin, slowly intensifying. A reticle of sorts will appear around you and slowly narrow in, and you know it's a matter of time. After the reticle narrows and the music stops, tendrils of malice will erupt from the ground and attempt to grab you and drag you under. The tendrils aren't scary, the music isn't scary, it's the powerlessness you feel as you can do nothing but flee from your attacker, and the feeling of reduced agency as you have to abandon your previous path to seek safety. These feelings are scary, the music and spooky tendrils are just the dressing. Or perhaps my favorite idea, the wandering monster. This has been done in the recent Resident Evil remakes to perfection with Mr. X and Nemesis. And I think this is a perfect fit for Breath of the Wild 2. Imagine a strong, scary-looking enemy that is always active somewhere on the map and is often actively looking for you. Similar to the way that Guardians treated you once they knew you were in the area, but taken to the next level. Imagine that you're wandering around exploring some old forts, minding your own business, when suddenly you hear a terrifying roar. The rotation of the camera reveals that your enemy has found you, and now you have to give it your all just to make it away. This monster should be the same level of strength through the entire game. So at the beginning, you're utterly powerless and can do nothing but run away from it. As you get stronger and get access to more powers and better weapons, you can begin to fight it off well enough to stun or injure it and make the getaway easier. Then, at the end of the game, perhaps as you go towards the final area to fight the boss, he comes at you one last time and you defeat him once and for all. I think this would be fantastically scary and a really great new element. Breath of the Wild 2 will feature an entirely changed world full of new things to explore, and twists on old areas worth checking out again. But you can never be fully at ease while exploring because you know that thing is a single monstrous roar away. This wouldn't even be Nintendo's first time experimenting with this idea. They used it to fantastic effect in Metroid Fusion with the SAX. The encounters are scripted, but they certainly don't feel that way because it's so often not the first time that you enter the room that the fight triggers. And SAX is so overwhelmingly strong that all you can do is run. The footsteps and the theme music that accompanied SAX still chill me to my bone. Those are just a few ways that I think Breath of the Wild could genuinely bring the scares that people seem to want it to provide. I won't be heartbroken if it's just tonally dark in the way that Majora's Mask is, but I'd also be thrilled to get another Zelda game with some genuinely scary moments. How about you guys? Would you like to see the game be scary? Do you think that a monster wandering Hyrule constantly looking for Link is a great idea, or does it seem way too stressful? Let me know in the comments below. And please consider dropping a like and a sub if you haven't. I also have a Twitter and a Discord if you'd like to reach me directly. Thanks for watching, and keep that torch lit bright. You never know what's lurking in the darkness, and it's dangerous to go alone.